All right. Well, welcome to the show again, and stay tuned for a really fantastic guest I'll tell you about in just a minute. But before I want to tell you what a joy it is for the keynotes that I'm now doing, and guess what they're called? Business etiquette, what's in, what's not. Yes, all of a sudden, Charm School is back. Goodness, I had a charm school when I was in my 20s, and those topics are back. Why? Because professionalism needs to come back. Why? Because we need civility in the workplace. Why? So that people will be productive and companies will have ROI. So isn't it interesting? Kind of like in my way of saying old shoes. If I keep my shoes long enough, they're bound to come back. And that's what's happening. So I would love to talk to you about doing a conference or a keynote speech on business etiquette, what's in, what's not. It's really a fun topic. Okay. I always want to thank my sponsors, first of all. And one is the beautiful blouse that I'm wearing today from Betty Ryder Boutique. You will find her lovely store at Preston Center in Dallas, Texas. Lots of gorgeous European-style clothing, and I'm honored that she is one of my sponsors. And my other sponsor is Taylor Bags, beautifully made in Spain. I want you to check them out. Gorgeous colors, leather that's just squishy soft, handbags that go everywhere all the time with you. All right, let's get started for today. I know someone who has been a father figure for more than 8,000 children. You want to know more? Stay tuned.
Welcome to our podcast, Doing It Right. This podcast reveals authentic stories from successful leaders doing it right. It's about their journey to become a leader, their choices, motivations, and lessons. In essence, how they built successful personal brands. Your host is Valerie Sokolosky, author of 8 leadership books and nationally known as an authority on executive presence and personal branding. Let's get started. Here's Valerie.
All right. I want to welcome my guest today, Charles English, in transition from being the CEO of Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Dallas. Welcome. I'm so glad you're taking the time out today.
Valerie, thank you for the invite. And this is not something that I am not familiar with, especially when it comes from someone like you I've known for quite some time now.
Quite some time.
Yes, I remember when we first met at the mayor's breakfast.
We were walking down the hall, and
Yes.
all of a sudden we were walking together. We started a brief conversation, and audience, this is what I want you to know about this. That conversation led to a relationship
It did.
for many years.
It did. And I have a lot of quotes, and one that fits this one
All
is
right.
God does not work with coincidences.
I love
He
that.
put us together for a reason.
He did.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, besides our relationship, is to have you on the show. And I want to talk to you a little bit, Charles, about just what is it like to father, that's the word I'm using, 8,000 children. Tell us about when you were the CEO, just most recently, for all those years. What was it like?
Every day was a different day. Every child of that 8,000 that we served had their own unique issues, challenges, and that sort of thing. But I think we can take that question a little further back and what was the thing that influenced your passion to make a decision to leave your world of banking and finance and investment banking and your wealth management in Highland Park in an executive chair to go to work for an organization where we don't necessarily have a chair because we're out in the community working with families and kids and helping them to reach their full potential, which is inserted in our mission statement, to reach their full potential of becoming productive, caring, and responsible citizens. Yes, and that mission was very strong for me to consider.
So that was exactly what I was going to ask you in terms of how did you transition? Let's just take the wonderful skills that you exuded over your many years, 30 years, was it, in the banking and finance industry?
I would say 35.
Okay, up it a little bit. I'm trying to help us age-wise, you know?
And there was a lot of learning that went into that 35 that I incorporated into the Boys and Girls
And
Club.
that's exactly
Okay.
right. How, what are truly, because people often, Charles, ask me, well, I don't know if what I'm doing now will work over here in something I'm considering. And that's exactly what the question is. What was so transferable from banking and finance into this wonderful nonprofit?
That's a wonderful question. And, given the putting it in context, I had kids in private colleges, okay? And their mom was an educator, and I was the breadwinner in banking and finance. And I'm being asked to step down from my 3 years as a board member to take over an insolvent institution. And insolvency in the financial world is you just broke, okay?
That's bad.
We were looking at maybe 3 months to meeting our last payroll. And as a result of that, that would have left several kids on the street without having a place to go after school and during the summer.
Wow.
That's where God comes in. He says, well, Charles, have you heard about the story of Jonah? Yes. Nineveh, right? And you sent him down to Nineveh, but he was very, very reluctant, right? Well, sometimes in life, God is always constantly preparing you for something that is going to put your creed of being a good person, a religious person, a good father, a good husband, is going to put it to a challenge. And that was my challenge. I could not see the kids not having a safe and productive environment to help promote them out of communities that oftentimes was depicted as being poor, underserved, and where medical, healthcare, food desert existed. So I, through lots of prayers, 3 weeks later, I realized that I couldn't sleep, and I accepted the offer to step down, and we started rebuilding this organization.
Wow.
From insolvency to currently over $40 million endowment, and a host of a lot of investors. We don't have donors, and we have investors in the lives of our kids.
Absolutely.
And we have from 5 clubs in 2006 to now 25 club locations serving 8,000 kids, from serving just a handful of kids when I took over.
Charles, that's amazing and very inspiring. And having known you this amount of time, I'm curious about some of the challenges that you face. Let me just ask you a couple of them, because these are life-changing opportunities for these kids. I wrote down in my notes, don't say kids, say children. And here you are saying kids, so I may go back to
They
kids.
are my kids.
Your kids. All right, they'll be mine too. But one of the challenges, there's several I want to ask you about. One of them is language barriers. We both know that there's a lot of foreign people who don't speak English coming into our country, and unfortunately a lot from Texas borders, putting in a plug on that. And to think that, this is statistics, China will soon be the #1 English-speaking country in the world. That's interesting.
Very interesting.
How does your work help these kids with language?
Excellent question. We realized that the demographics of Dallas was changing at a rapid pace. And we had employed, to date, close to 200 youth developers. Okay?
Good.
And one of the things we were very intentional about is looking at bilingual learners. And we also wanted to make sure that we hired as well as had volunteers who could help our children who are coming from English second language households. Okay? And because of the communication that we knew that our young people needed, corporate America could care less about whether you can speak correct English and have effective communication skills. They want to make sure that you can communicate in the King's language, and we knew that for a fact. So the balancing act is, how do we honor their culture of Hispanics or the Mexicans who are now in the country where their generation of family members speak primarily Spanish? And how do we bridge that? And we bridged it with hiring the right staff that were bilingual, but also encouraging our students to understand that they had to transition their culture without abandoning their culture to
both.
be able to effectively communicate, because our overall mission was to help them become what? Productive, caring, and responsible citizens.
Citizens.
Okay?
Right.
And for them to become productive citizens, education, education, education.
That's right.
Okay?
Yes.
And those who are going off to college, very skillful in their communication skills, oftentimes because of what they learned through the Boys and Girls Club.
That's wonderful. The children that come and that you're helping are from 6-ish to
Yeah.
what-ish?
18 years of age and beyond. We track our
Really?
kids in the military, law enforcement, and primarily in college
No.
until they complete that degree. And then we have a number of national sponsors. And we ask them to give serious consideration for these kids who have had a journey of challenges to have an opportunity to work for the company. And so we've had CPA firms that have offered internships. We've had manufacturing companies that have offered internship, and banks that have offered summer internship. And through that, these kids come out with not only a degree, but also with an employment that is going to take them out of a history of poverty.
You know, Charles, that's one of the greatest things, in my opinion, that the greater Dallas area, Texas, I'll just say, and more, the whole United States is opening our arms to particularly the children who need things like the Boys and Girls Clubs. I wanted to talk about something a little bit fun on the same subject, though. Art Linkletter, remember many years ago, he had children say the darndest things.
I do remember.
And he would ask questions, and I just remember laughing because children would say the funniest things. I want to share a couple of things that I went back and looked at and then ask you a question about it. So one time, Art asked a little boy what he wanted to be when he grew up, and the little boy said, a pilot. And Art said, well, okay, if you were a pilot, and one day you were flying the airplane and all the engines stopped working, what would you say? And without hesitation, the little boy said, our Father who art in heaven. I was laughing. There's another one that I was laughing harder at, which is a little girl. Art said, tell me what your daddy does. And she said, he raises funds. And Art said, who does he raise funds for? And she said, himself. So my question to you, going back to Art Linkletter, but what were some maybe funny things the years you were involved, and still are, that you heard children say?
Oh, my God, the list is long, but one that comes to mind immediately is that we had a group of elementary kids who've never been on a site tour downtown in a high-rise. So this law firm invited about 40 of the kids to have lunch. And it was on the 13th floor of the building. And the food was all laid out, and it was a great event for the kids. Guess where they spent most of their time? at the window. They had never been in a, yes. And the questions were, well, how do we get up to the 13 floors? Well, it's called an elevator, okay? And so exposure
Yes.
is
Simple.
very, very important to us. And so one of my graduate students from high school got accepted into NYU,
Wow.
and I go with him. And he's at the subway station, and he's opening the door and holding it open for people to get on. I'm like,
dear.
Darius, you got to get in where you fit in, okay? You need to get on board. Otherwise, you're going to miss a whole lot of appointments in your life.
He was being gracious.
Yes, but he did not transfer
know.
his culture and the community in which he grew up in, which was in the Oak Cliff community, into going into a big city with a transportation of, subway system.
We're in the big city now.
Yes.
Right.
So I thought that was funny.
What about some inspiring stories? Give me one that really was touched you.
Well, we have 8,000 kids, and we don't have enough time for me to tell you
Pick
the
one.
number.
Just one,
I
Charles.
will pick one.
Okay.
I'll pick one.
Thank you.
Here's a young lady. At one point in time, they were homeless. Her and her mom and her young sister. And she had been a club member since about the 8th grade, right? And I knew that she was pretty smart. And we were able to get involved and got their lives stabilized and a resident that they could live in, and started creating an opportunity for her to envision going to college. I had a board member who is a very strong alumni advocate for his university. And he and his wife took this young lady to the University of Texas, introduced her to the president of the University of Texas. And after 2 or 3 years, this young lady becomes the first African-American female at that of the student body. And she was able to transition that campus in a way that had never imagined before because of her background and her upbringing. She had stamina, but she also had grit
Grit.
and toughness.
Charles, when we were talking, you gave me several of your own lessons learned. We're laughing a lot, right, behind camera. One of them was create a mission-driven lifestyle
Right.
so that your passion fuels your commitment to succeed.
Right.
So talk to us about how that worked.
Okay, the way we see our mission, and first of all, I would suggest and strongly advise anyone who really want to impact the lives of others, look at what your mission is. I never worked for any organization of the 3-4 different banks I worked for. I looked at the mission of that bank, and the one I was the most proud of was the fact that I started up with 2 other guys, a bank in Plano. And you know what we called it, our tagline?
What?
Independence Bank, your bank. Your bank. We
Great tagline.
We wanted to make sure that our new customer base understood that they were not an account number. So I looked at that mission and I went for it. When I came into the Boys and Girls Club mission world, and it said, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to involve a lot of programs, a lot of activities, a lot of volunteerism, a lot of mentoring to enable young people, give them the gift of hope.
Oh,
Give
yes.
them a gift of having a desire to be where they want to be, but they cannot clearly see it now. So that's why we need to give them the exposure of a broad spectrum of life that is outside of their zip code area in which they live. And part of that is driving out of them their mindset, their heart, a passion for wanting to do something in life. And so once we discover that, once we discover that passion, then that's when it's our job to make sure we put them in a position of success. And I always say to everyone, if you just don't have a lifestyle of driving mission to a point where you are meeting the needs beyond your family, then maybe perhaps you just have a job.
A job. You know, I'll tag on to that in that my husband's parents came from meager means, hardworking, middle-class people, and his mother, as a toddler, took him in the car, and he told me later would drive around into the high-end places where people lived in that city
Exposure.
and would say, son, someday you will live in that. And she planted that seed. And I think that's wonderful. So one of the things we talked about, Charles, that was one of your lessons learned, was don't make friends only when you need them. Relationships are continually essential to your success.
Yeah, that's a lifelong learning that I've used in many cases with my family, with my friends, especially with my staff. You don't make friends when you need them, because it basically implies that only time you'll call them is when you use them. You'll be using them. But you maintain relationships, and that's what it's all about. And I gave an example of one where, as I was being recruited for the president CEO position in Boys and Girls Club of Dallas, and I went over to the search firm for an appointment. I walk in the door, and the business manager met me, and she said, "Welcome, Charles. It's good seeing you again."
Oh,
As
my
if
goodness.
she knew me in a very personal way. And I said, "Have we met before?" She said, "Yes. In the 11th grade English class, you edited my essays and helped me with my English writing in high school.
Isn't that fun?
And we were friends at the time." And we then meet. And she
reconnect.
says to the owner of the search firm, "We don't need a reference check. I'm his reference."
Oh my gosh, what a great story.
Yes.
Remember that, audience. Keep your build your relationships
And
all
maintain
along the
them.
way and maintain them.
Right.
That's so important
Yes.
because people today, I find someone will call and we will meet for a reason. And if I fulfill that need they had, exactly what you're saying, never hear from them again. I like that one.
Yeah.
We could talk forever. But I want to leave with one more thing. And you brought it up earlier. Leadership, the skills you brought. And you said, and I'm saying to the audience, let's just talk leadership because all of you are wanting to be better and better leaders, as do I. Leadership relies on your ability and willingness to develop other leaders. It's not all about you, is it? No. And I know my audience knows that. Any comment about that?
Yeah, leaders
Pretty
make leaders.
straightforward.
Leaders make leaders.
Right.
And it could be a selfish motive behind that because you want to replace yourself one day. Succession planning.
Succession planning.
Comes with leaders making leaders. Oftentimes, what is being confused is that you have high-performing employees who are great contributors to the mission and the goals and objectives of the company, but they never really develop that intangible skill called leadership. And that thing is so it's so intense. The intangible part of it comes from a soul that has been developed over the years that some refer to as wisdom, adaptability, communication, and helping people to become more engaged with the mission of the organization and give them an opportunity to fail and to learn from that failure. And a lot of leaders oftentimes fail at leadership because they just miss some of those very simple components of leadership.
Well said. And I'll add one more thing, which is often leaders in the executive coaching part of what I do will say, well, Valerie, do you think leaders are born or developed? And I say the desire to be a leader starts in your heart.
That's a great beginning.
That's the great beginning.
Yes.
And the skills and the competencies grow with experience. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
I think you should. I think you should.
What do you have something to say about that?
Well, authenticity, humility, those are those intangibles I spoke of. And being very honest and truthful. And as I told my kids, my grown kids now, Dad knows everything. And they laugh. And they say, "You really?" I said, "Let me explain something. You go to school to learn knowledge. Then you apply that knowledge to your employer or to become an entrepreneur. And then you gain experience. But after knowledge and experience, you need to understand how do you sustain the motivation behind that knowledge and that experience. And that grows into wisdom, okay? Now, part of wisdom is knowing what you don't know. So if you
And
know some
admitting it,
things,
and admitting
but
it.
if you also know and admit
Okay.
to things that you don't know, then you know everything.
There you go. I've loved this interview, Charles. Just real. I told you that. I said, audience, every guest says, well, what will this be like or what will you ask? And I never tell them exactly what I'll ask because that would be
That's
really
true.
boring. You have been incredible, sir, and a friend of many years, and that will stay.
Oh, absolutely, Valerie.
So pass
Yes.
the word, audience.
Yes.
This has been a great interview and a lot of lessons that you can take from Charles in his long walk of experience and now transitioning into whatever wonderfulness you end up being. So here's my Valerieism for today. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. Let me say,
Amen.
do you like that,
I like it.
Charles? Let me say it again, audience. I think it's great too. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. No, I didn't come up with that on my own. I read it somewhere, but I think it fits wisely. And that is, we are here to serve. And that's why that whole movement of servant leadership
Yes.
came into being, and that's humility. Leaders who become egotistical are not going to throw a shadow of leadership that anyone will want to follow. And until next time, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Come back when I'll have another wonderful guest like today. Charles, thank you so much for being
Thank
on the
you
show.
again, Valerie.
All right, and look
Appreciate
into
it.
Boys
Okay.
and Girls Clubs of Greater Dallas. Fabulous organization. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening. To receive Valerie's voice, free monthly leadership tips, and to learn more about her leadership programs and coaching, visit her website, valerieandcompany.com. Next week, we'll be here again to inspire, engage, and equip you with teachable points of view from successful leaders who have been doing it right. Until then, lead authentically.